You're still there.
Okay, so you just got the warning that the recording started. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the July meeting of the Memphis Horticultural Society. Our speaker tonight is Randy Hedgepath. He's the Tennessee State Naturalist, position he's held for about 13, 14 years, since 2007. And in that role, he serves as an advocate for and public educator about the state's natural areas and ecosystems. Randy is a West Tennessee native, growing up on a family farm near the Tennessee River and graduating from UT Martin. He worked seasonally for several years for the National Park Service and the Tennessee State Parks before joining the state park system as a ranger naturalist, where he served for more than 30 years. How many years is it now, Randy?
38.
38, more than 30 by almost 10.
I'm going for 40.
His passion is being immersed in nature, whether it's on a hike or a paddle trip or a scenic drive. And he's passionate about helping others understand, appreciate, and conserve the environment. Throughout the year, Randy can be found leading waterfall tours, wildflower hikes, nature walks, and scenic excursions to state parks and natural areas. And the best way to find out where he's going to be is to hit the Tennessee State Parks website and see where he's going to be and book yourself to participate. So, Randy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Not afternoon anymore. But what I plan to do tonight is to show you pictures of some of my favorite wildflowers, most of which are native to Tennessee. And there are some of them I know stories about, and some of them I know just a little bit about, but I will share that with you going through them. So this is like a flower show of native wildflowers with some stories thrown in for good measure. And I'm going to go to share the screen now. Get a picture up. So if you're looking at your screen now, you're thinking he queued the wrong program up.
We're not seeing it yet. We're still seeing you.
You're still seeing me.
Yeah, you have to share screen in Zoom.
Okay, let me see. Where is the share screen? Okay, first technical issue. Thought we had this queued up, but you can still just see me, huh?
Yep.
Okay, do you have any clue of what I'm doing wrong?
No, if you've got it pulled up in PowerPoint and you've hit share screen at the bottom of Zoom, which on my screen is a green icon. You are a co-host, so you have that ability.
Well, I can't get the share screen to come up here. So let me see about this. About now. Okay. I have to.
Okay. There you go.
Oh, I'm on the right track.
Yep.
I'll try not to use up all of my time doing this. Let's see, wildflowers. Where are you? And this there we go. All right, can you see a picture of a flower?
We still see your Windows desktop. No.
Well, obviously, I have not done a whole lot of these, or I would know what I'm doing wrong.
So there, oh, there you go. You got it. You're good.
Okay. So it kind of deleted 3 of my beginning slides, but I can begin with this one. This is let me see if I can go back and get the rest of them. Yeah, I better go with this. I started out by showing a picture of snow and ice, and not many wildflowers blooming in snow and ice. But when I was a young man working seasonally for the National Park Service, I worked at the Ozark National Scenic Riverways in Missouri. And we had this placemat thing that we gave away for people's orientation. And it had a map and information about the park. And it had a list of wildflowers, which I thought was really cool. And it had summer in a list, and spring in a list, and fall in a list. And then it had winter and one listed. So I asked the boss, I've never heard of this flower before. Can you tell me where I can come back in the winter and see it? I know I'm not working in the winter, but I'd like to come back and see this flower. I've never seen one that bloomed in the middle of the winter before. And he said, yeah, and he laughed. What it said was ice flowers. And it's not really a flower, it's ice formations. If you have a corner of your place where you're letting the wing stem, the yellow or the white wing stem grow, and a little wild part of your yard, you might say, that wing stem, after it dies back in the fall, will have a hollow stem filled with moisture. And when that moisture goes through a night of freezing temperatures, it crystallizes the ice coming out of the top break in the weed or in the side. So those ice flowers, which I had a picture of, but it's gone. After the ice flowers are done, sometimes in the middle of February, you can start to see things popping up in the forest floor. Like the one that's on the screen is called the harbinger of spring. It's telling you that spring is on its way. The harbinger of spring is also called salt and pepper because the top of the stamens there, darker color, and the whiter petals around it make it look like salt and pepper. And it's a member of the carrot family, Umbelliferae. Let me see if this, yeah, I figured. I'm not being able to advance it at all, Steve. So I'm gonna have to go back to crisis mode here. Stop share.
There we go.
Are you seeing the picture of the snow and ice?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was supposed to be my backdrop for what I just talked about. This is an aerial view of one of our state natural areas. This is near Cookeville, Tennessee. It's called the Burgess Falls, the queen waterfall of all of our wonderful waterfalls in Tennessee state parks here. And when it looks like this, there's not many wildflowers in the woods. But those wing stems with that water inside of them, when that crystallizing, you got to wait until like late November, early December, when you have the first nights when it's below freezing all night long. And that will cause that moisture in those stems to crystallize out like this. This is what looks like coming out of the end of a broken one, or maybe out of the side of one that's just cracked on the side. Ice flowers. But pretty soon there's things that start popping up through the green, the grays and browns of the forest floor in the winter. Here's a couple of the early ones of violet and the spring beauty. But the harbinger of spring I just talked about is the first real sign, I think, of a spring a-coming. I've seen these start to bloom in mid-February. Close to Memphis, I'm not sure if they live close to Memphis or not, but they are at Mousetail Landing State Park over on the Tennessee River. And you can see them over there in mid-February and see that spring is on its way. In the mountains, we have a member of the azalea family that is a vine. Not many vines in the azalea family, but this is one. It's called trailing arbutus. It's got these sandpapery leaves, and it has these clusters of little white flowers underneath those leaves. And sometimes they turn pink, but they're very fragrant, very beautiful. You have to get down on your belly sometimes to fully appreciate them. I'm reminded, looking at trailing arbutus here, of a fella that lived in Grundy County where I used to work. I worked at South Cumberland State Park for a while in Grundy, Franklin, and Marion County. And not many people from Grundy County became poets, but Leonard Tate did. And he wrote a poem in memorial to his mother, and he called it Trailing Our Beauties. And he used a quote from his mother as she lay sick and pretty soon to go. She said in the poem, "Please, son, bring me the flowers of the arbutus. I know it's that time of year when they're out there, so that I can smell one more time before I have to go the most wonderful fragrance of our mountain." I thought that was a wonderful thing to say. Here's one that comes up really early, flowers, and then the leaf comes up around its stem. And it's a beautiful flower, terrible flower to play the little lovelorn game. If you pull one of these flowers off and start pulling off petals, and you pull off and you say, "She loves me not," all of the petals are likely to fall off. They're so loosely cemented. So if you start out with "She loves me not" and they all fall off, I'm sorry, your song cut out. But this is a plant that has a kind of an incredible name. It's called bloodroot. And you can see kind of the bloody sap going up in the stem of the flower there. Bloodroot, sanguinaria, has a tuber, is a perennial, and it has a tuber about as big as my little finger here. And if you sliced off the end of that tuber, it would be like slicing off the end of my finger almost, because the red fluid would well up and start dripping out of the end of the, bloodroot. Sounds pretty gross, but wouldn't you want to rub that on your gums? Well, you would be better off if you did, because sanguinaria, the sap of the bloodroot, cures gum disease. It was a constituent of the Viadent mouthwash for many years until they came up with a synthetic replacement for it. But the bottle used to say contains sanguinaria for good gum health. I guess they didn't want to put bloodroot. They afraid they would lose some customers, but sanguinaria means kind of blood. So I don't guess they were interested in their Spanish speaking customers. One of the cutest things in spring, coming out in the early spring, is all the little Dutchman's breeches hung out on the line to dry. On the side of the mountains in East Tennessee, these little things delight. They're so cute. They're a member of the poppy group. And they look like the pants that little Dutch boys used to wear. So that's why they call them Dutchman's breeches. They're cute, but don't think they're like candy or anything like that, because they are very poisonous. Another member, very close relative of the Dutchman's breeches, is flowers that look like big kernels of white corn. So they call this squirrel corn, equally poisonous. I always enjoy seeing that. If you go to Edgar Evans State Park on Center Hill Lake, there's a lot of the squirrel corn that blooms along the Highland Rim Nature Trail. And every spring, I look forward to the speckled leaves of the trout lily coming up in the forest. There's a lot of these near Tullahoma at the Short Springs State Natural Area. The first speckled leaf of this that I see in the spring, I try to eat it. Gets me in tune with the local environment, you might say. And they're delicious. In the lily family, there's a lot of edible garden plants. You probably have a lot in your garden from that family. Trout lilies. We have the yellow ones, which are the most common in Tennessee, but in some places, like near Nashville at the Long Hunter State Park and down near Swanee, there is a white species of trout lily that is a little bit more rare, but very interesting as well. Spring beauties are said to be the most numerous blooming wildflower of North America. Now, how you would determine such a thing, I have no clue, but I've seen yards, like here at Montgomery Bell State Park, we have a picnic area, grassy picnic area, that in the springtime, before the grass starts greening up, these start covering that ground with thousands and thousands and thousands of blossoms. The spring beauties have the little lines down each petal and the pink tops to their stamen there, and they have a tuber. It is a perennial, so if you dig up the tuber, it is delicious. So that gives it its other name, little tater. To make a meal out of spring beauties, though, you would have to work all day because they're kind of tiny, about the size of a dime. But they are good. I've tried them. They have a brown skin, white meat inside, and they are quite tasty. If you're lost out in the wilderness, and the spring beauties will keep you fed. And we have something that comes out on a tree early in the spring. Driving around through the forest, even in West Tennessee there, down Natchez Trace and Chickasaw and at Shelby Forest, I see these in bloom. It's called Sarvis berry, Service. I think it's the only institutionalized mispronunciation of a name I know of, Sarvis berry. The berries are good. These flowers come out in mid-March, one of the earliest shrubs to bloom. And some people ask why it's called Sarvis or service berry. Around the Easter service, maybe, when it blooms, could be a reason. Another reason I've heard is that it was an indication that you could bury your relatives that died during the winter. When you live in southern Canada or Michigan and the ground is frozen hard as a rock most of the winter, you have to wait until it gets thawed up a little bit. And the sarvisberry blooming tells you that the ground is thawed up. Kind of morbid story there. All right, here we have one of my very favorites, whose flower is usually not visible to people. You have to look for the leaf. And I'll admit, this photograph that you see here is staged. Yes, I got down on my knees. I pulled all the leaf litter from around the wild ginger here. I made sure that there was a piece of root exposed because that's the ginger-like part of the plant. And the flower that lays on the ground hidden underneath the leaf litter, I propped up with a rock so you could see it. So this is called wild ginger. The root is usable, just like the ginger you might buy in the store, except this is smaller than a pencil. And the ginger you buy in the store is much bigger. It's an Asian variety. But we have wild ginger that blooms along the streams in Middle Tennessee here. And this is Uvularia. It's named after the thing that's in your, if you open your mouth really wide, you can see a thing hanging back there in the back of your throat. They said that this flower reminded them of that. So that's why they call it Uvularia, scientific name. Bellflower, it's called perfoliate bellflower. The most interesting thing about this flower, in my opinion, is that the leaves are perforated by the stem. Look closely and you'll see the stem goes right through the leaf. The leaf is all the way around the stem. So that makes it kind of interesting and one of my favorites. My internship was at Land Between the Lakes from UT Martin. I went up to Land Between the Lakes and worked at Brandon Spring Group Camp. And my job was leading a lot of kids from schools on nature walks. And there was a lot that I didn't know back then, still a lot that I don't know. I would like to invite anybody that has corrections for me afterwards, in the question and answer thing, go ahead. One of the first flowers I learned from a book, I got me a field guide to wildflowers. And one of the first ones I learned was this one. I learned that it was called fire pink. It blooms in the middle of April and it is not pink. So I was perplexed. Why do you call this fire pink? Well, you look at the end of the petals to find that out. At the end of each petal, there looks like cuts. So pink meant something for many hundreds of years before it became the light shade of red. It meant cut. So the end of each petal is cut. 5 petals. It's also got a calyx right underneath the flower there. That is quite sticky. If you see one of these in the forest, reach down and feel underneath the flower with your 2 fingers and it'll glue them together. So that gives it its name, catchfly. And there's some debate, I don't know what your opinion is, but that tells me that it probably wants bugs to land on it, get caught, and maybe digest them. Some of my friends don't know it doesn't do that. Well, I don't know, but it's awful suspicious that it has a sticky trap underneath the flower. One of my very favorites, the fire pink. All right, going into violets. Violets are a symbol of true love. Back in Europe, the ones that we imported from Europe have heart-shaped leaves. So giving somebody a bouquet of violets with those heart-shaped leaves is a demonstration of true love. Oh, you didn't know that, huh? Have you given somebody a bouquet of violets? Mhm. Hybridization has taken place between some of the blue violets that we brought from Europe and some of the white varieties that we have here in America. So we had this one that came up, it looks kind of gray from afar, so they called it a Confederate violet. But I'm not sure the genus and species of this one. All the violets are viola, but this graced the South on the plantation walks. But roses are red and violets are blue is not always true. Sometimes you have white, sometimes you have yellow. So how do you tell a violet if it's not blue? Well, here's a way that I do for kids. I lead a lot of kids on nature walks. And when they come to a violet, I tell them to look at the flower as you're looking, maybe as a bug, at a billboard advertising the plant for you. You got two petals straight up. You got two petals down to the side, kind of curving in. Come on in. So, hey, bugs, come on down. And the one in the middle, here's your landing strip. And look at that landing strip. There's lines on it leading you right into the pollen. So that's how you tell a violet. Roses are red and violets are blue? No. Just look for the landing lines leading you there. The landing lines are even more special than just what you see there. If you were an insect that could see infrared, the heat, those landing lines would glow because they are a slight bit warmer than the rest of the flower. So violets are yellow, but this one will make you sick if you eat it, old fellow. The blue violets are one of my favorite wild nibbles in the springtime. It's full of vitamin C and A. The blue flowered violets are very good, but please, I can spare you a tummy ache by telling you, don't eat the yellow ones, don't eat the white ones. Now this plant is said to be a rue anemone, but it's neither a rue nor an anemone. It is called a windflower because it has a stiff stem and it wiggles in the slightest breeze. It's in the buttercup family that anemones are in. So a flower looks like an anemone, the leaves look like a rue, but it's actually neither one. Here is a true buttercup. Buttercup family is a big family, and the ones that are actually yellow and give the yellow butter name to the family, most of those are very poisonous. You can see another member of the family to the left of the yellow flowers there, the hepatica. It's a family of mostly poisonous plants. So don't let the name fool you. Reese's buttercups are okay, but wild buttercups growing in the pasture, don't eat them because they're quite toxic. And here's a plant that is in kind of danger, is being exploited commercially to the detriment of its ecology. It has a root that has been used for centuries to boost your immune system and to make you feel good all over. It's called golden seal, and golden seal blooms and grows statewide across Tennessee. But I seldom point it out or tell people where it is because I'm afraid they'll go and dig it out. It is a very popular medicinal plant, golden seal. And behind there, you can see a trillium. Trilliums are called that because it has three of them. What does it have three of? Everything. It has 3 leaves, 3 sepals, 3 petals, 9 stamen, which is 3 times 3. And this is the only one that you see here that you can find in Shelby County in the wild. You go out to Shelby Forest and look on the slope of the Luss Hill there, and you can find the prairie trillium. It starts growing in Tennessee about the Cumberland Plateau and west. It doesn't go, its range doesn't extend over into the big mountains, but it extends out into the prairies in the Midwest. This is recurvatum. The sepals below the petals there go straight down the side of the main stem of the plant. And this one is the only one I know of that the leaves, 3 leaves, have a stem separating them from the main stem. All the other trilliums don't look like they have a stem on their leaves at all. Like this one. There are two big groups of trilliums. I'm telling you about trilliums. You don't have many of them there in Shelby County, but you may go over into Middle and East Tennessee and see a whole bunch. This one, don't go too far. It's only on the western highland rim or a few counties along the Tennessee River. It's called the twisted trillium. The petals make almost a complete turn. The two big groups of trilliums, this one is in the mottled leaf trilliums. And the one before was in that as well, even though the leaves were not very mottled. But here is the unmottled leaf group. This is the southern red trillium, blooms along the mountainsides of the Cumberland Plateau and the rich hollows of the Highland Rim in Middle Tennessee and up into the Smokies. There's a one that looks almost exactly like this, except that the flower is underneath the leaves. That one is called the Vases trillium. And this one is obvious name. It is the biggest flower, the most showy flower. It's called the grandiflora trillium. And this one is named after a British botanist, Mr. Catesby. And when I first found this, I found it at a state forest near Mont Eagle and Swanee called Franklin State Forest. I had never seen it anywhere else that I'd been hiking, and I'd been hiking a lot of places, I thought. But when I saw this beautiful trillium with the flower hanging underneath the leaf and the petals and the sepals curving around, I was thrilled that I might have found a rare species. So I called up Todd Crabtree, our state botanist, and I said, Todd, guess what? And he, without much enthusiasm, said, what? Said, I found a trillium that I think might be rare. It's down at Franklin Forest. Really? He said. Which kind? It's according to what I found in the book, it's a Catesby's trillium. And a long silence, and Todd eventually came in and says, what makes you think that could be rare? Well, I've never seen it anywhere else. Randy, do you go hiking in Alabama and Georgia very often? He asked. No. Well, if you did, you would realize that that's a pretty abundant trillium in those states. So it wasn't rare at all. The Catesby's trillium is quite abundant in the southeast corner of Tennessee and further south. Trilliums, I love trilliums. Trilliums are very hard to transplant. As we tell people that if you want to kill the plant, you can try to transplant it, but it's very difficult to get to live. So we don't recommend trying to transplant them at all. Now here is a wildflower that has two extremes of names. Sometimes it's called like woods betony. Betony is a word that means the plants that grew on the side of Mount Olympus for Zeus and his fellow gods to eat at their leisure. So food of the gods. The other name, other extreme, is lousewort. They say it, if it grows around your barn or your house, a harbor for lice, your children could get lice from this. That's ridiculous. But this plant is stuck with two completely separate names, lousewort or woods betony. I helped save an island one time. There is an island surrounded by the Elk River, and I joined a land trust organization that helped buy most of that island. The island was called Bluebell Island, an island that in the springtime got covered with Virginia bluebells, the epitome of spring ephemerals. You know, a spring ephemeral, that's a plant that comes up after it thinks maybe that the danger of freezing is over, but before the leaves come out. It's got to do all of its growing, flowering, and so forth within that short time period, from middle of March to the last of April. Virginia bluebells do just that. One of my favorites. I love that blue color. They say it's one of the rarest forms of, or rarest colors in nature. Not a real true pigment sometimes with the birds especially. This is called purple Phacelia or Phacelia bipinnatifida. It's a double compound leaf, bipinnatifida. And Phacelia means purple flower or blue flower. But scorpion weed is another name for it because of the looks like the stinger of the scorpion when it's unfurling the flowers. And if you notice my background, I'll back up so you can see it here. But the background behind me is a picture from Savage Gulf State Natural Area. And it is a growth of Phacelia on the mountainside, so thick that the whole mountainside had turned purple. It seemed to grow on the top of rocks without any soil. It was amazing. So I was a young ranger. I was looking for programs that I could do. I walked down in there, saw this display, thought to myself, next year, I have got to bring people and share this with them. This would be a thrilling wildflower walk. So the next year came. People came for the walk. We walked down there and we could not find any purple flowers. If I had just read my field guide a little bit more completely and noticed the word biennial. Yes, the mistakes of a young ranger. So the next year I had a successful walk and thought, but where it grows is usually a place where lots of other flowers were growing. So even when the Phacelia was not there, it was still worth the trip. Collins Gulf Trail, Savage Gulf State Natural Area. And I went especially to see this flower at a Nature Conservancy Reserve up in Sumner County. And I hear it's over in Clay County at another hollow. This is Blue-Eyed Mary. The Blue-Eyed Mary is quite abundant further north, but in Tennessee, its range is very, very limited in only a couple of places, like I say, Sumner County and Clay County in north middle Tennessee. Blue-Eyed Mary. In the rare category, or disjunct, if you will, is this one. It is called the Western Wallflower. I found out today it's another biennial, but they must take turns because there's usually some out every year. Western Wallflower grows to be 4 or 5 feet tall, but you usually can't see that because it's growing on the side of limestone bluffs. Very hard to get an idea of just how tall it is looking up at the cliff face and seeing this come out of the crevices and the rocks. It was a plant that was known to occur at Edgar Evans State Park. My assistant, who is named Holly Taylor, lives with her ranger husband there at Edgar Evans State Park. So when I saw their park patch had the Western Wallflower on it, I asked her where I could go see them. She said, well, you can see them on the bluffs over the lake, but you'd have to have a boat. And she and I looked at each other and we could almost see each other's light bulb coming up. A boat tour to see wildflowers. Yes, that would work. So every year they have a whole week-long Western Wallflower boat trip scheduled every day the last week in May. Come on up to Edgar Evans next May and get to see the Western Wallflowers in person. Hey, the dwarf larkspur. This I became very familiar with at Radnor Lake. I worked at Radnor Lake as a naturalist ranger for 9 years after I got through with 16 years down at South Cumberland. And there were a large areas of Radnor Lake State Natural Area that in the springtime got covered with this. Deer would not touch it. Radnor has a very high population of deer, but this thrives because the deer eat everything else, but they will not eat this. It is so toxic. Even they know better. It's called delphinium. They say that the budding flowers look like diving dolphins. Do you agree? It looks like it, for sure. A use for this, though, the Native Americans I have read use the flowers to make a blue dye. And the settlers went a step further, put in forget the word for a permanent making solution or chemical, but they put that into the blue dye and made it into an ink, a blue ink. Very toxic plant, but you can use it as ink. Same color, different story. This has an edible root. It's called the Nashville breadroot. It and a few flowers coming after this are demonstrations of what you can find in the cedar glades of Middle Tennessee. The cedar glades are some of the most unique natural habitats anywhere in America. And the Nashville breadroot is kind of a symbol of that, in my opinion. The root is edible, not very good, but it's edible. It is a legume. And there are cactus in those cedar glades. The only native cactus to Tennessee, the prickly pear, grows in the cedar glades. And there's somebody hiding in that flower. If you look closely, pollinators, a big subject. Last week, they had a pollinator week, and Holly had all sorts of little postings about different kinds of pollinators, not just honeybees, but all the multitudes of other things that can pollinate. Speaking of pollinators, there's something I forgot to tell you about the wild ginger. You might be wondering, the flower I told you lay underneath the leaf litter on the ground. That's because it wants to accommodate its pollinator, which is walking insects, ants. There are some species of flowers that depend on ants to plant their seeds as well. One of my favorite cedar glade plants is the limestone fame flower. It's a tiny little thing. It's a succulent, got those thick leaves to hold the water in that desert-like habitat. But the star of the show, a plant that was the first wildflower added to the endangered species list, only grew, we knew from records in the past, in Middle Tennessee, in Rutherford, Davidson, and Wilson County, thought to be extinct for 60 years. Then Dr. Elsie Quarterman, professor of biology at Vanderbilt University, who was studying cedar glades, almost wrecked her car one day when she was driving into Cedars of Lebanon State Park and saw these blooming in the side ditch. The Tennessee coneflower, known only from those cedar glades and nowhere else in the world. It is one of the most beautiful plants, Echinacea tennesseeensis. And here we go, the state symbols of Tennessee. The state symbol you might think is the iris. I love iris. This is a wild iris, the dwarf-crested iris. We have a thriving iris industry in Tennessee. Maybe that's why it has been made our state flower, but the ones that are usually pictured are ones that you guys grow in your gardens and not the ones that grow out in the wild. This one does grow out in the wild, but it's kind of small. To get the big ones, the hybridization and genetics have to be addressed. Dwarf-crested iris, but we have a wild iris that is special to you guys. It only grows in the wild along the Mississippi River. It is called the copper iris, the only reddish iris in Eastern North America. And this picture was taken by my friend David Haggard, who works up at Reelfoot Lake. He saw it growing in the side ditch there along the road around the swamp. So copper iris, looks for it next spring. It grows anywhere in the Mississippi floodplain, could be a location for it. Look in the side ditches. And then we have a Tennessee state wildflower, the passion flower or the maypop. They call it the maypop because if you take one of those green fruits and squish it, it may or may not go. But the maypop is also called apricot vine. And I learned today that it's probably worth eating because it is a good treatment for worry and anxiety. The Jesuit priest who came over to America in the early days saw in this a symbol of the passion play of Christ, the crown of thorns, the three nails, the blood droplets, everything in the passion play. Passion means suffering. And then our state tree, the tallest growing living thing in Eastern North America, capable of getting taller than any other tree in Tennessee. Now, all kids usually bring up, well, what about redwoods? That's not Tennessee, okay? That's a whole different place called California. So in Tennessee, the king of our forests, the tallest tree that we have are the tulip poplars. Neither a tulip nor a poplar. It is a magnolia, but it is capable of growing 180 feet tall. There's one on the Ramsey Cascades Trail at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park that is 24 feet, I believe, in circumference. That's enough to hide your pickup truck behind. So tulip poplars, a pioneer species, most foresters say, but they can grow really big and really tall. Here is a magnolia that is called a magnolia. This is the umbrella tree magnolia. We have 4 other species of magnolia on the Cumberland Plateau, all of them being deciduous. This is umbrella tree, we have big leaf, and we have cucumber tree, and then we have the tulip poplar. Over in the Smokies, they have another one called the Fraser's magnolia. So all of our native magnolias are deciduous, and they have huge flowers. The flower on this one gets to be about 10 to 12 inches across. And I thought I had a great idea one time. I invited this young lady to dinner at my place, and I was going to cook for her. And on the way home, I found this flower of a big leaf magnolia. If it had been an umbrella tree, I might have been okay, but it was a big leaf. And the big leaf, I found out very quickly, was loaded with fragrance. I carried it into my house and put it in a jar of water. And after a few minutes, it was so stinky in there. It smelled like somebody had spilled a whole gallon of cheap perfume all over my carpet. And I tried to get rid of the smell, as I was cooking. I cooked onions, try to get rid of the smell. And I thought was gone, but my nose had adapted, you see. So when she got there and walked in, she said, "Oh, nice place you have here, but what's that awful smell?" But it's okay, because she's still around after 35 years, putting up with my unusual smells. Oh, gardeners may not be, this is maybe graduate level of gardening, right? Orchids. Yeah, this is another plant that you try to transplant it, you kill it just about every time. These are a group of ladies ready to show you the color, the pink lady slipper orchid. These grow under a mixed forest of, there has to be some conifers, some evergreens in the forest for this to do well. Burned over forest is helpful for it as well. It, like a lot of the orchids, if not all of them, have a relationship with a fungus that fixes nitrogen in the soil for them to use to grow. The pink lady slipper. And in a hardwood forest or a deciduous forest, if you have exclusively deciduous forest, you could have the yellow lady slippers on the side of Lost Cove and all oak hickory forest. I have seen these several times. They have no reward. They're kind of ungrateful, I guess, to the pollinators. The pollinators go in there thinking, "Oh gosh, this is bound to be a treasure trove," and they get nothing. And to get out, they got to squeeze through a little opening that puts the little packets of pollen on their skin or their body. And the orchid gives them nothing. There's no nutrition for the bugs at all. Here's a couple of more orchids. I love the yellow fringed orchid. I look for those along power lines, and you can find them in West Tennessee as well. The one on the right, though, is the monkey orchid. It looks like little white monkeys. It is on the endangered species list. There are a few locations in the Cumberland Plateau area. Star Mountain near the Hiwassee River has a big growth of them. But it is one of the rarest plants in Tennessee, the white fringeless orchid. And an orchid that is very abundant, grows everywhere in Tennessee that you have forest. If you have a woods, you probably have these. They're called cranefly orchids. And most of the time you can't find these because they're so well camouflaged, and there's no leaves in the summer when they are flowering. They're flowering right now. They have been flowering for the last few weeks. But to find them is, wow, you have to be eagle eye for sure. What you look for in the winter, though, these seersucker fabric leaves that if you turn them over are deep purple underneath. Yeah, it only has leaves in the wintertime. It has flowers in the summertime because it's adapted to a deciduous forest. When would the leaves get sunshine? When the leaves are not on the trees above. So it's adapted to that habitat. Deciduous forest, the wild azaleas. Oh, I love the wild azaleas. They're so fragrant and all around. This is called the pinkster flower. The flowers start coming out before the leaves do. Wild azalea. And the azaleas are in the same family as the laurels. This is mountain laurel, a plant that, well, I got a story about this one too. My maintenance man, when I worked at South Cumberland at Stone Door, had finished the 8th grade. That's all. But he knew a name for every plant in the forest. He grew up going out hunting and fishing, and he knew all the plants in the forest by sometimes his name or his dad's name or his uncle's name that they gave it. I stopped one day and I said, what do you call this? Because I enjoyed hearing his names for things. And he said, well, we call it mountain laurel. Well, that's great, I said. Did you know that it was poisonous? Oh, yeah. Well, we used to feed it to our hogs. Why did you do that, I asked. Well, it was fun. You feed them a little bit and they'd start staggering around. You feed them a little bit more and they start falling down and grunting real loud. And why are you doing that to your poor hogs, I asked. Well, we had to do it because, you see, they weren't gaining any weight. So we had to get rid of them worms inside. And this is the old-time hog wormer. You lost a hog once in a while, but it didn't cost anything. And your hogs usually got better and got fat. Rhododendron. The Catawba rhododendron just gotten through blooming on the top of Roan Mountain. One of the most beautiful wildflower displays in America. I like the little section of a poem about rhododendron. Ralph Waldo Emerson walked into a woods where he knew nobody had been or was going to be because he had to bushwhack in there. And he found the beautiful growth of rhododendron. And he wrote, "O Rhodora, when the sages ask thee why, your beauty is wasted on just the earth and sky. Tell them then that if eyes were meant for seeing, then beauty is its own reward for being." And the azalea that is got the most spectacular color. On the Cumberland Plateau, there's a more red one called the Cumberland Ince. This one grows on top of Spence Field in the Smoky Mountains in great abundance in June and July. Flame azalea usually grows not in clusters like the others, but solo. Viburnum. Speaking of pollinators, this plant is interested in some interesting pollinators. I like to have kids sniff the flower cluster here of the maple leaf viburnum and then describe what it sounds, what it smells like. I get answers like, "Oh, that smells like dirty socks. Ugh, that smells like rotting something." Yeah, its pollinators are flies. So it attracts by having a foul smell, the maple leaf viburnum. Here's one that don't have a smell as far as I know, but it has a beautiful color. And the butterflies, which if you could specify what pollinators you want to come to your yard, butterflies would probably be one of the top on your list. Butterfly weed is a kind of milkweed here, popular with monarchs and other butterflies. Echinacea again. Do you notice the difference between our echinacea here and the Tennesseans? The petals on the purple coneflower here flex down. On the Tennessee coneflower, they flex up. And the habitat is completely different, of course. My favorite wild edible plant is this one. It's called the Indian cucumber root. It has a whorl of leaves, then a smaller whorl with a flower hanging down at the top. A little white tuber that is crunchy and sweet and absolutely delicious. I have found it in the hills of Natchez Trace State Park, and I'm sure it grows over at Chickasaw and Million Shelby as well. Very interesting plant, very adaptable plant. It can change gender at will. If it needs to be a male, it will change into a male. This is the Jack in the pulpit. We have two different varieties. These are the ones with the purple lines here. And my major story of this presentation concerns this plant because my mentor, who was from the Memphis area, was Mac Pritchard. Some of you might have known Mac. He's a wonderful man who did so much for conservation in Tennessee. But he had a lot of trial and error through the years to learn things about nature. He told me the story about what he learned about the Jack in the Pulpit. He said he was on his way to Chattanooga to give a slide presentation to a garden club probably. And he had all day to get there, so he stopped by the Fiery Gizzard to take a walk. And he walked too long. So when he realized he had spent too long in there, he had to rush to get out. Always in a rush because he's going to be late. So he thought to himself, if I go up the side of the mountain here, I can get to a road and get back to my car a lot quicker. So he climbed up through the rocks and fallen trees. And when he got to the top, instead of coming out on a road, he came out into a backyard. And there was a lady sitting on the back porch of this house who immediately saw this guy coming out of the woods in a uniform, stood up and screamed at him, "What are you doing?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. Didn't mean to trespass. I'm trying to get to the Langford Road. I'm in a hurry to get to my appointment." "Really? Well, what are you doing out there in them woods?" "Well, ma'am, I'm studying plants. I'm the state naturalist and I'm studying plants." "Is that so?" she said. "Well, you ever heard of an Indian turnip?" "Well, no, ma'am, but I'm in a kind of a hurry. Can I go across here? I promise I won't trespass no more." "Well, I'd like to see how many plants you know. Do you know an Indian turnip?" "Well, ma'am, I don't believe I've ever heard of that one. No." She said, "Well, there's one right there. Take a look at it." And I looked over and I said, "Well, I've always called that Jack in the Pulpit." And that made the lady smile. And she said, "Well, yeah, I've heard it called that too. But did you know that you could eat it?" "No, ma'am, but I'm kind of in a hurry." She said, "Well, it won't take but a minute. You can dig up that root and see how it looks like a turnip." So curiosity got the best of Mac, as it usually did. He got down and dug around and came up with the root and held it up and to the lady and said, "You can eat this?" And she said, "Yeah." So without really wise decision making going on in his head, he bit into it. Instantly, he felt like his mouth had been set on fire. It was horrible pain. He looked around to try to get this stuff out of his mouth, and he saw a water faucet. So he went over and he turned on the water faucet, which turned out to be a worse mistake than he had made before, because the oxalate in the roots of the Jack in the Pulpit is activated by water. So now it's even worse, and he's spitting and spitting, and finally he's thinking to himself as he's trying to get it out of his mouth, "Geez, I don't guess I'm going to make it to Chattanooga because I'm going to kill this woman. Better not do that." And when he got his composure back a little bit, he noticed that the lady had been laughing. But he said to her, "Ma'am, that was just awful. Why did you do that to me?" And she leaned forward and said, "Well, young feller, if you hadn't have been in such a hurry, I'd have told you you had to cook it first." And that's how Mac learned that maybe you could eat the Jack in the Pulpit. Later on, we found out that it takes a lot more than just cooking to make it edible. So don't believe the name Indian turnip. The moral of the story, when you're studying nature, don't get in a hurry. So I guess we're in a hurry to get rid of this, go through this program here. So let's go. I'm going into different seasons for the last part of the program here. My favorite from the late summer, ironweed. It'll start blooming, if it's not already, out in the abandoned pastures and wildlands of Tennessee. Sometimes it grows along with its real tall neighbor, the Joe Pye weed. Joe Pye weed is known.
I'm watching the end of this presentation.
Okay, somebody is unmuted and talking over me. Okay, back to that program. The Joe Pye weed is a medicinal plant. It's got whorls of leaves and the lavender flowers at the top, and it usually grows alongside the ironweed. And it's been used for various things, including fever reduction. So Joe Pye weed maybe means what fever, the word in Native American languages for fever, or maybe it was a snake oil salesman that used this to entice customers to buy his worthless stuff? I don't know, but Joe Pye weed is called that, Joe Pye, P-Y-E. And here is a plant that is falsely accused, the symbol of September in Tennessee, the goldenrod. We have about 12 species of goldenrod in Tennessee, none of which are really responsible for your hay fever. The hay fever is caused by a plant that grows right along beside this in great abundance called ragweed. This has beautiful yellow flowers attracting insect pollinators. Ragweed is wind pollinated. It has no color. It just dumps large amounts of pollen into the air and hopes it blows. And sometimes it blows into your nose. One of my favorite fall flowers is the Rexia, or the meadow beauty. You have two varieties, the Maryland and the Virginia, one white and one is purple flowered. The seed pods look like little urns, don't you think? And the symbol of fall for most folks is the asters. Lots of asters bloom in the fall. This is New England aster, which is a great one for your garden. It has the clasping leaves around the back of the stem. I had a friend who has passed away, but she came on lots of my hikes when I was a young ranger and started her own little hiking group. She called her hiking group the Fall Asters. I thought that was really cute. I said, Fran, why did you choose the name Fall Asters for your hiking group? And she said, well, none of us started walking or hiking until we're in our 50s. So we're all late bloomers, just like fall aster. And my favorite wildflowers are the fall blooming lobelias. There's a couple of earlier blooming ones, Indian tobacco and the cedar glade lobelia. This is spike lobelia, and the lobelia that outdoes everybody is this one. Its color doesn't even look real. It's a cardinal flower, my very favorite. I look forward every year to the cardinal flower in bloom. I have a book called Wildflower Folklore by Laura Sue Martin, who she notes that the cardinal flower it was told to her that it may have been an ingredient in a love potion, especially useful for older women. I think whoever told her that was probably an older man wanting to get rid of his older woman, because this is very toxic. So a love potion made out of this would not keep your love interest around very long. But it is my favorite because of its aesthetics. It grows in the stream beds, in the places where it would be wet in the springtime. You can find cardinal in the fall. So those are my flowers, and I hope you've enjoyed it tonight. And if you have any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. I wish you could have heard all the chuckling throughout your presentation.
Yeah, that's one of the bad things.
One thing about being online that you miss out on. So we do have a few minutes for questions. If you're here in the room, I'll have to relay them into the microphone for you. If you're online, you can put them in the chat box and I'll relay them that way. So we do have one question online, which was about the spring beauties. You said that they were tiny little tubers, but how do you actually eat them? Do you have to cook them, or do you eat them raw, or what?
Well, I've never ate them cooked. I've always just dug them from the ground and ate them raw. And they look like little potatoes, but they sure taste better than an uncooked potato. Uncooked potatoes don't taste good at all to me, but the little spring beauties do taste quite well. But I hear they're even better cooked. I just haven't tried it that way.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
There's a rare vine in Shelby County called Glabra. Has he ever seen?
Okay, we have a question from the floor. There's a rare vine in Shelby County called Schizandra glavra with a V or a B? With a B. Is that one you know?
Schizandra, no. No, that's not one that rings a bell.
Magnolia vine is another name for it.
I'm not familiar with that one. So you've reached the end of my
finally hit a wall, huh? Okay. So it's on the
I'm actually a recreational botanist, so I don't claim to be a real botanist.
Can you talk about carnivorous?
And then
do you have any else? Are there are there any carnivorous plants here in Tennessee that you want to highlight for a moment?
Well, the controversial one that I showed earlier, the fire pink, I'm still on the side of, yes, it is carnivorous, but a lot of my park ranger and scientist friends differ with me on that one. But we do have sundews in the Cumberland Plateau area, which got the leaf with all the little drops of glue on it, you know, and something lands on it and it curls up around it.
Okay.
So we have those. They're really tiny, but I have seen those along power lines of all places on the Cumberland Plateau. I don't think we have Venus flaxfraps or pitcher plants. Pitcher plants were reported from the Cumberland Plateau 80 years ago, but I was involved with some of the botanists from our Natural Heritage Division out looking for it, and we did a lot of hiking, but never found a pitcher plant. So I don't think they live in Tennessee now.
Okay. Also, another question from the floor. Where is the picture that's in your wallpaper behind you? Where is that at?
Okay. That is the Cumberland, or the okay. Go again. It is the Collins Gulf Trail. The Collins Gulf Trail is one of the trails of the Savage Gulf State Natural Area, which is in turn a part of the South Cumberland State Park. To get to this, you have to go to Mott Eagle on the interstate and go north into Grundy County. And there is a trailhead that will get you there. But it was kind of confusing. Last year, I didn't go down in there. I usually go down in there every year because I love it so much. It's one of the most abundant and diverse displays of spring wildflowers I know of outside of the Smokies. So I love to go down in there and see everything blooming. And last year I didn't go because of the travel restrictions and all that. So I was very disappointed and looking forward to coming back this year, but I was thinking this year was going to be one of the off years. But it looked like that. So I was wrong. I must have miscalculated some way, or there might be some off kilter, some that have matured and some that aren't. There are always some other gorge or some other place where they are blooming, if the ones in your local area are not. Biennials. This takes 2 years for them to complete their cycle, not that they take turns.
Well, you'd think with biennials, there'd always be some that are blooming and some that are in their first year, sort of like the cicadas, the idea there's continuity, but it's just an odd cycle. So
yeah, I guess as a young ranger, I saw the mountainside covered, and when it wasn't covered the next year, it may have been some flowers up there, but nothing like it had been the year before. So very disappointing.
Anything else?
Columbo.
Columbo?
Columbo.
Not Columbine.
Columbo.
Okay. So a plant called Columbo.
Ah, yes, I know that one. Yeah, Columbo, it takes several years to bloom. It has big wide leaves, a basal rosette of leaves, and then it puts a stalk up that has leaves on the side of it. I don't remember the time period, but it seems like it's like 10, 12 years that it has to grow before it will put up a stalk and bloom. Is that your understanding, whoever asked about Columbo?
Yeah, that's what we were. And the flowers are what?
Insignificant, but sort of like nothing but not.
Okay.
I didn't hear.
Anything else? So I noticed that throughout your presentation, you had a lot of tips for foraging, but everything was little tiny portions. So I'm not sure that would sustain us.
Yeah. If you're doing that in the park, you know, you're only allowed to eat what you can gather in your hand.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, you're not supposed to take your bucket down into the Collins Gulf and gather your bunch of stuff like that. But you know, you can learn the flowers on the park and then look for them out on lands where you can get them.
Right.
About hiking up. Hiking
Where? I mean, yeah, okay. Yeah, so I know that the state parks website talks about hikes and stuff, but you want to give us a little couple tips on hiking opportunities since you probably have them all memorized?
Well, I don't actually have them all memorized, but July for me and June, we call it Junior Ranger Month because we spend a lot of time doing kids programs in the summertime. So I have several things for kids coming up. We have an overnight camp here at Montgomery Bell for teenagers the week after next. And there's a walk here at Montgomery Bell for a couple of groups later in the fall. Then I have waterfall tours and swimming hole tours coming up in the fall as well. So go to the state parks website that has a list of activities. We have 250 rangers, and a large number of them have been on hikes with me, so they can use my stories whenever they want. And so going with the young rangers will be a fulfilling experience for you, as well as going with some of us old guys. We have a marvelous core of rangers in state parks these days.
And I do know that for this weekend here in town, T.O. Fuller has a ranger-led hike on Saturday and Sunday of this coming weekend.
Yes.
And because that park has undergone some interesting changes in recent years, if you've got the free time, I think that would be well worth it. You have to register online at the state parks website, but it'd be worth doing. So.
Yeah, Dakota out there does a wonderful job.
Yeah. And Jessica.
Jessica is fabulous. So
yeah.
And there's a young man up at Meeman Shelby. Gosh, his name escapes me, right?
Yeah, I know. I can't think of it either. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
But he was a singer and a musician.
Yeah.
But he's also a great naturalist, and he may not know all the wildflowers, but he knows all the birds.
Okay. So, okay. Well, I guess we'll wrap this up with thanking you very much for this presentation. It was a lot of fun and very interesting. So I'm going to pause the recording, then a couple quick announcements. And but again, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate you.
Hope everybody enjoyed it.